faces. We love them. We judge them. We seek them. From the moment we are born, we seek them. A newborn's eyes may be fuzzy and nearsighted, but the very first thing they focus on is any face of the person that they are being held by. In our Bible stories this morning, we have Moses asking to see God, asking to see his glory or his face, and Jesus looking at a face on a coin and directing attention back to God. This morning, I'm actually going to focus on the Moses story. Here is Moses, our prophet. Some might say the prophet. He lived, it was around 1500 to 1400 BC. Theologians sometimes call him the covenant mediator. Moses was not a self-appointed leader. He had reluctantly responded to a call from God. If we remember back in chapters 3 and 4 in Exodus, back at the burning bush, firstly, Moses hid his own face because he was afraid to look at God. And then secondly, he pleaded with God, please send someone else, please, which is how he ended up with Aaron as his helper. So now here we are, 30 chapters later in Exodus. Moses and Aaron and the people of God, the people of Israel, have been through almost a whole lifetime with God. You know all the stories. Slavery in Egypt, the plagues, the Passover, the crossing of the Red Sea, and then wandering and provision in the wilderness, finally arriving at Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments, Sabbath laws, instructions for worship. And as we heard last week, the people breaking those instructions with the episode of the golden calf. And that's what led to God's threat to no longer travel with them, and why we hear Moses today seeking reassurance that God would not actually leave them. And at the end of Deuteronomy, on the death of Moses, we read that there is no prophet like him, whom the Lord knew face to face. And in the previous verses that we didn't read just now, we are told that Moses talks to God face to face in the tent of meeting with the pillar of cloud at the entrance. So Moses has gone from hiding his own face and being afraid to look at God to talking face to face, and today asking to see God's glory. To which God responds by saying, you can't see my face. Nobody can see my face and live. So I have to ask, surely Moses, the prophet like no other, after an absolute lifetime of being God's mediator, would he have doubted his relationship to God to the point of not just seeking assurance that God would not abandon them, but needing to see God? This reading actually started with Moses saying to God, this is actually from another version, but he said, yet you have assured me that you know me by name and think highly of me. Yet Moses still wants more. Prove you are still with us. Who are we if we are not visibly with you? If you are not visibly with us? Is that our human nature? Always wanting more? always needing more? But perhaps it's a part of our design that as we get to know a little bit about God, we want to know more. And as our relationship deepens, we want to be even closer. Even after a lifetime, every day, as we take one step of faith, we are encouraged and strengthened to take another and another. Do you desire more of God's presence? Are you greedy for God? I think it's the one thing we're allowed to be greedy for. When, where, and how do you seek God's face? And when you think of God, do you think of some kind of supernatural being with a literal face? Have we managed to mould God into our own image? Do we think we have God all figured out, wrapped her up neatly and tied her up in a box? Is our God primarily a God of laws, requiring us to believe and do things in order to be rewarded only in the afterlife? Or is our God a God of love, grace, compassion, and justice, who offers us an invitation to partake in living a transformed life here and now in this world, and filling it with God's glory now? Our God offers us an invitation to look and follow Jesus' example. Jesus, the man who walked this earth, a Jewish mystic, remarkable healer, wisdom teacher, social prophet, movement initiator, passionate advocate of God's justice, and a radical critic of the domination system. Jesus, who was able to confound the Pharisees and religious teachers with insights and answers like we heard in today's reading. Do you think much on the human side of Jesus? Or only the resurrected post-Easter Jesus of Christian experience and tradition? As Marcus Borg says, Jesus is, for us Christians, the decisive revelation of what a full life of God looks like. Radically centred in God and filled with the Spirit, he is the decisive disclosure and epiphany of what can be seen of God embodied in a human life. Jesus shows us the character, passion, and heart of God. Or as Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 says, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Jesus, we ask you, over the past 2,000 years, have we, as your followers, distorted your face, misrepresented you, domesticated you? The answer is, unfortunately, a resounding yes. Of course, those who came before us didn't mean to, and we don't mean to either. But still we do. How can we not? We weren't there 2,000 years ago. So like a babe in arms, do we need to earnestly seek Jesus' face again? Is what we think we know about Jesus stopping us from seeing beyond the sheet like those little ants? Because how we see Jesus is important. We must take regular time to intentionally look at Jesus with fresh 2020 eyes and not fuzzy, out-of-focus baby eyes. We must challenge ourselves to read not only the Bible regularly, but books and articles, listen to podcasts, zoom into studies and seminars, and not just the ones we like and agree with either. Perhaps we need to be challenged by ones that open our mind to new possibilities. The way we see Jesus will greatly impact the way we live our lives as disciples. I see two sides of this story of seeking God's face or following Jesus. And you're familiar with them. It's what our whole lives are all about. Firstly, we need to continually and personally seek God's glory and presence in order to strengthen and deepen our own relationships with God. And then secondly, what happens in and through us, both individually and corporately, because of us drawing closer to God. Maybe Moses wasn't doubting God or whining like a child. More, I want more, give me more. Maybe he wasn't even challenging God to prove his presence. When he asked to see God's glory, maybe Moses was boldly, willingly inviting God to draw closer. When we ask God to come close, we step into a more dangerous, more intimate relationship. As we step closer to the very core of God's own being. He's there for us always. We just have to take our little steps. And if we do ask God to come closer, we must risk. We must risk our comfort and everything we think we know about God. As we learn more about her, walk more closely with him, and be open to seeing God in new ways and serving in new places. Moses asked for God's glory, so the people of Israel would be reassured that God was with them. And in answering in the positive, God proved he was willing to go a long way to help Moses and the people prepare for and take their next steps. This great mystery we call God is there for us too, unconditionally loving us and prompting us to seek more of God's presence and glory. And as we draw closer to God, the desire to be God's hands and feet and face to those around us also increases. Are we willing to boldly be God's people in this place? Are we bold enough to say, we only know you a little, God, but we would like to know you more? Are we bold enough to say, God, if you really are with us, people would know you through us. People would look at us and see glimpses of your love and justice and grace. For some people, for lots of people these days, we might be the only hands and face of God they ever see. Belden Lane, who's a contemporary Christian theologian, says, when we're trying to talk about God. We must speak, yet we cannot speak without stammering. The language of God stalks the borderland of the limits of language, using speech to confound speech, speaking in riddles, calling us to humble silence in the presence of mystery. Maybe that's why St. Francis said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel and use words if necessary." I had to put a bit of St. Francis in because Andrew's not here. Will you pray with me? Holy God, our language is limited, yet you are our living hope, and our hearts long for your glory. We boldly ask you to draw nearer to us, to fill us with your presence, so that we are overpowered and empowered and not afraid to take our next steps to serve you here in Darwin. Amen.